On a frosty night, Keanu Reeves observes a homeless mother in her car, her baby swaddled in mismatched blankets, battling the cold. Her weariness is apparent, and the baby's soft cries pierce the silence of the parking lot. The actions Keanu takes next will not only alter their lives but also leave you completely astonished. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow I'll have a special story for you. Keanu Reeves leaves the supermarket, 2 shopping bags in one hand. He pulls the hood of his coat over his head, a reflex formed after years of living in a world of flashing cameras and constant attention. However, tonight is different. The set had wrapped up early, giving him a rare moment to indulge in the mundane picking up groceries and enjoying the small, practical routines of a chaotic life. As he approached the car, something caught his eye. Parked in the farthest corner of the parking lot was an old beat-up scooter, its windows covered in condensation. Clothes hung haphazardly inside, swaying gently in the breeze. The sight made him pause. There was something about the car that felt wrong. Compelled by a sense of concern, Keanu approached slowly, not wishing to alarm her. "Hi," he started, his voice low and inviting. The woman, who was about to maneuver another cart, stopped in her tracks. Her eyes met his briefly before she looked away, reluctant to maintain eye contact. "Are you okay? Is there anything I can help with?" he inquired, maintaining a respectful distance. "No, I am fine, thank you," she responded, her voice cool yet betraying a hint of mistrust. She stepped back, clutching the cart more tightly, her rushed tone signaling a desire to end the conversation. Keanu nodded, understanding that any further probing might push her away. "Okay, I understand. If you need anything, I'll be around," he offered. She didn't respond but quickly moved back to the car, opened the door, and climbed inside almost mechanically. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she quickly returned to the station wagon, opening the door and slipping inside with practiced ease, as though this act had become routine. Keanu stayed rooted to his spot, watching as she settled into the driver's seat. Then, through the fog glass, he saw a small silhouette shifting in her arms. A baby. His chest tightened. The faint movement of the child, bundled in what looked like mismatched blankets, brought the situation into stark clarity. This wasn't just her story, it was theirs. Mother and child, struggling against the cold night in a car that offered little protection from the harsh realities of their lives. Keanu turned away, but the image stayed burned into his mind. As he got into his own car, he cast one last glance toward the station wagon. The silhouette of the baby was still visible, a haunting reminder of their fragile existence. As Keanu Reeves cast one last glance toward the far corner of the parking lot, the silhouette of the baby in the fogged-up car window remained etched in his mind. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the weight of the moment sink in before starting his engine. Driving away felt wrong, but he knew one thing for certain: this wasn't something he could ignore. The following morning, Keanu found himself driving back to the same supermarket. The previous night's events haunted him, the tension in the woman's shoulders, the weariness in her gaze, and the quiet vulnerability of the baby's cries. He couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do more. As he pulled into the same parking spot, his heart skipped a beat. The old car was still there, sitting forlornly in the corner with its fogged windows and cluttered interior. A few yards away, the woman came into view, clutching a plastic bag as she made her way toward the car. Keanu waited, observing quietly as she opened the door and placed the bag on the back seat. Reaching into his passenger seat, Keanu grabbed 2 items he had prepared at home: a bottle of mineral water and a new soft blanket still wrapped in its packaging. He wanted his gesture to be gentle, something that offered help without intruding on her pride. Walking toward the car, Keanu moved with deliberate care. Without saying a word, he placed the water and blanket on the hood, ensuring they were visible but not imposing. Then he retreated to his vehicle, watching from a distance. Minutes later, the car door creaked open. The woman hesitated, peering cautiously at the items on the hood. Her eyes scanned the parking lot, searching for the mysterious benefactor. Keanu stayed silent, waiting. Finally, she stepped forward, grabbed the items, and hurried back inside the car. He noticed her lips moving as if whispering a quiet "thank you," though he couldn't hear her words. Keanu exhaled, a mix of relief and frustration settling over him. He had done something, but it still felt like it wasn't enough. On the third day, Keanu returned to the parking lot. This time, he knew he needed to approach her again, but with more tact. Watching from a distance, he waited until she was near her car, pushing carts with visible exhaustion. When the moment felt right, he stepped forward. "Hi," he said softly, his voice carrying an unmistakable gentleness. She stopped, startled. Her eyes widened in recognition, but the weariness in her gaze quickly returned, mixed now with guarded curiosity. "I am the guy who left the water in the blanket yesterday," Keanu explained, keeping his tone low and non-threatening. "I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable." Her brow furrowed slightly, and her voice came out sharp, almost offensive. "You? Why?" "I saw you yesterday," Keanu said with a small shrug, meeting her gaze. "I thought you might need them, that's all." She stood still for a moment, her fingers tightening on the cart's handle. Then, with a hint of hesitation, she replied, "Thank you for the water and the blanket." Her words were cautious, each one carefully chosen as if she feared revealing too much. Keanu nodded, respecting her pace. "I just want to help, if you'll let me, and if you don't, that's okay too. But sometimes," he added gently, "accepting help isn't weakness. It's just a way to keep moving forward." Her posture softened slightly, though her eyes remained wary. Before she could respond, a muffled cry broke the stillness. Keanu turned his head toward the car, the sound of the baby's distress cutting through the quiet parking lot. The woman's expression shifted instantly. She hurried to the car, opening the door and scooping up the baby in her arms. She rocked him gently, her face tight with worry as she whispered soothing words. Keanu hesitated, his instinct urging him to step closer but knowing it could overstep her boundaries. Instead, he asked softly, "Do you need anything? For him formula diapers?" Her lips parted, and for a moment she looked as though she might refuse. But then her shoulders sagged, and her voice came out in a near whisper, full of exhaustion and surrender. "Milk. I need milk." "I'll be right back," Keanu promised, his voice steady. Without waiting for her reply, he turned and walked toward the supermarket, his determination growing with every step. Keanu's steps were brisk as he left the supermarket, carrying a small bag of supplies, powdered formula, diapers, and a pack of wipes. His mind replayed the brief exchange with the woman, her hesitation, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the fragile crack in her armor as she admitted her need for milk. He knew this gesture wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. When Keanu returned to the old car, the woman was seated inside, rocking the baby in her arms. Her wary gaze followed him as he approached, but this time, there was no sharpness in her expression, only apprehension. "I brought these," Keanu said softly, holding up the bag before placing it gently on the ground by the car. He stepped back to give her space. The woman hesitated, her fingers clutching the door handle as though deciding whether to bolt or stay. Slowly, she opened the door, glancing at the items as if they might vanish. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. She picked up the bag with trembling hands, holding it close as though it contained something far more valuable than diapers and formula. Keanu nodded, his tone reassuring. "I know it's none of my business, but if you need anything else, I'll be around." For a moment, she didn't respond. Her attention focused on the baby, who cooed softly against her chest. Then, almost as if speaking to herself, she whispered, "Things weren't supposed to be like this." The weight of her words hit Keanu like a wave. This wasn't just a simple struggle, it was a story of broken plans and shattered dreams. He didn't press her for details, sensing that she wasn't ready to share. Instead, he offered a quiet reply. "They rarely are, but it doesn't mean they can't get better." The next day, Keanu returned to the parking lot. He wasn't sure why, but something about the woman and her child had etched itself into his heart. As he parked his car and stepped out, he noticed her sitting on the curb near her vehicle, cradling the baby. The early morning sun cast a golden glow over the scene, but the weariness in her posture was unmistakable. "Hi," Keanu greeted, keeping his distance. The woman looked up, her surprise evident, though she seemed less defensive than before. "You came back." "I said I'd be around," Keanu replied, offering a small, reassuring smile. "I hope you didn't feel pressured yesterday." She shook her head slowly. "No, it was kind of you." Keanu saw an opportunity to build trust. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the curb beside her. She hesitated for a beat before nodding. Keanu lowered himself onto the concrete, resting his elbows on his knees. The silence that followed wasn't awkward but tentative, like the first steps on a fragile bridge. "You don't have to tell me anything if you are not comfortable," he said gently. "But, can I ask your name?" The woman studied him for a moment before answering, "Megan." "Nice to meet you, Megan," Keanu said sincerely. "And the little one? What's his name?" Her gaze softened as she looked down at the baby in her arms. "Elliot." Keanu smiled. "Elliot's a strong name. I like it." Megan's shoulders relaxed slightly, her wariness giving way to a faint hint of trust. Sensing her openness, Keanu decided to share a piece of himself. "You know, I've been through some tough times too," he began, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "I've lost people who were my whole world. There were moments I didn't think I could keep going, but I had help, and sometimes accepting help is what saves us." Megan listened silently, her focus shifting between Elliot and Keanu. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Sometimes it feels like I am alone in the world, like no one cares." Keanu shook his head firmly, his gaze unwavering. "I care," he said, "and I know we don't know each other, but I want to help if you'll let me." Her silence spoke volumes. Though she didn't reply, her expression softened, a flicker of hope glimmering in her tired eyes. Later that night, while Megan and Elliot slept in the car, Keanu returned to the parking lot. In his hands were 2 bags filled with baby food, hygiene items, and a small stuffed animal. Carefully, he placed the bags by her car door along with a handwritten note that read, "No strings attached, just care, Keanu." As he walked away, Keanu glanced back once, the faint glow of the car's interior light casting a quiet halo over the woman and her child. For the first time, he felt like he was truly making a difference. The next morning, Megan awoke to the sight of the items Keanu had left beside her car. Her fingers brushed over the soft fabric of the blanket and the small stuffed animal that peeked out of the bag. A lump formed in her throat as she picked up the toy, her hands trembling. It was such a simple gesture, yet it carried a weight she hadn't felt in years. Kindness without expectation. Conflicted, she gripped the items tightly. Part of her wanted to reject it all, clinging to the fragile sense of control she still had. But another part of her, the mother desperate to shield her child from the harshness of their reality, knew this was exactly what she needed. She looked around, scanning the parking lot, but Keanu was already gone. And yet, something inside her had shifted a spark of hope she hadn't dared feel in a long time. The following day, Megan saw Keanu again. He was walking through the parking lot, his pace unhurried, carrying his usual quiet presence. This time, she didn't wait for him to approach. With Elliot in her arms, she called out, her voice firm but laced with vulnerability. "Keanu?" she said, stepping forward. He turned, his face lighting up with a warm smile. "Hi, Megan," he replied. "How's Elliot?" She adjusted her grip on her son, holding him a little closer. "Thank you," she said, holding up one of the bags he had left the night before. It means a lot." Keanu's smile deepened. "I'm glad it helped. If you need anything else, just let me know." Megan hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line as she searched for the courage to continue. "Two don't usually talk about this," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "But..." Keanu waited patiently, his expression soft but attentive. Megan took a deep breath, summoning her strength. "I lost everything," she said finally, her words tumbling out in a rush. "My husband, my home, my life. And what happened after? It's still hard to believe." Keanu met her eyes, his gaze steady and full of empathy. "You don't have to rush," he said gently. "I am here whenever you are ready." Megan swallowed hard, nodding as tears welled in her eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt like someone was truly listening. Megan's voice cracked as she began her story, her hands clutching Elliot tightly, as if he were her anchor. "It all started a year ago," she said, her voice trembling. "My husband Daniel, car accident. He was coming home from work just a regular night. At least, it should have been." Keanu stayed silent, giving her the space to continue. "The police knocked on my door," she continued, a tear sliding down her cheek. "It felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. They said he didn't suffer, but that didn't matter. He was gone." She paused, her lips quivering as she fought to keep her composure. After that, everything turned upside down. The life insurance wasn't enough. Bills piled up. And then Daniel's parents, her jaw tightened. They said I wasn't capable of taking care of Elliot. Keanu frowned, his brow furrowing deeply. They tried to take him? Megan nodded slowly, her voice filled with bitterness. They filed for custody, claiming I was emotionally unstable. And maybe they were right. I was a mess, but everything I did was for Elliot. She inhaled sharply, her hands trembling. I couldn't afford a good lawyer, so when things started turning against me, I ran. I packed up my car, took what little savings I had left and moved to another state. I thought it would be temporary. I thought I'd find a job and get back on my feet. Her voice grew bitter as she recounted what came next. I did find a job at a little cafe. I started saving. For a while, it felt like I was making progress. But then one of the customers started harassing me, saying disgusting things. One day, I couldn't take it anymore and snapped. I yelled at him. The manager didn't care, just fired me on the spot. Keanu closed his eyes briefly, feeling a knot of anger and empathy tighten in his chest. Megan's pain was palpable in every word. With no money left, I got evicted, Megan continued, her voice quieter now. The car became our home. I've been trying to find work, but it's hard with Elliot always with me. No one wants to hire a mother who has to bring her baby everywhere. We've been living like this, just trying to survive. She looked down at Elliot, her tears finally spilling over. He deserves more. He deserves better than this. But I am so tired. Keanu took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Megan, you've been fighting a battle no one should have to face alone. You are doing everything you can for Elliot, and that's more than anyone could ask for. Megan looked up at him, her disbelief clear. But I should have figured it out. I should have... You are trying, Keanu interrupted gently, and that's enough. No one can do this alone. Megan's shoulders shook as she broke down, the weight of her struggles finally spilling out in the presence of someone who cared. Keanu sat silently by her side, offering her the space to grieve and the silent promise that things were about to change. Megan looked down at the old worn steering wheel of her car, her hands trembling as she cradled Elliot close. Keanu's words echoed in her mind, a promise to help when she felt most defeated. Her heart wavered between hope and fear, but the weight of exhaustion finally tipped the scales. She knew she couldn't keep living like this, not for herself, but for Elliot. Meanwhile, Keanu gripped the wheel of his car, his phone resting in the passenger seat as he made call after call. His determination was unwavering. This wasn't just a fleeting moment of kindness, it was a mission to give Megan and Elliot a fighting chance. By the time he reached his final call, he had a plan. The soft hum of his car engine filled the air as he turned back toward the supermarket parking lot, a small envelope in his hand. 40 minutes later, Keanu pulled back into the parking lot. Megan, still sitting in her old car, looked up at the sound of his engine. She held Elliot close, her expression a mix of skepticism and guarded curiosity. She wanted to believe in the kindness of this stranger, but years of hardship had taught her to be wary. Keanu stepped out, walking slowly toward her. His presence was calm, deliberate. In his hand, he held the envelope carefully, like it carried something fragile. Stopping a few feet from her, he extended it toward her. I got a room for you and Elliot, he said softly. It's a simple motel, but it's clean and safe. You can rest there tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out the next step together. Megan hesitated, her gaze flickering between the envelope and Keanu's face. I can't accept this, she stammered, her voice trembling. I don't want charity. Keanu's expression softened, but his voice held a quiet strength. This isn't charity, Megan, it's help. We all need help sometimes, and right now, you and Elliot deserve a safe place to sleep. Please, let me do this for you. Megan's shoulders sagged under the weight of her exhaustion. She clutched Elliot tighter, her instincts battling her pride. Finally, she reached out, her hand shaking slightly as she took the envelope. Inside, she found a room key, a handwritten note with the motel's address, and a small amount of cash for food. Her voice broke as she murmured, "Thank you." Keanu smiled gently. "You are welcome. I'll drive behind you to make sure you get there safely." The motel was a modest one, its neon sign flickering faintly in the cool night air. For Megan, it felt like a sanctuary. As she stepped into the room, the soft glow of a bedside lamp illuminated clean sheets, a small but spotless bathroom, and a single bed big enough for her and Elliot. She carefully laid her son down, tucking him in under the fresh blankets. For the first time in weeks, his small body relaxed completely, and his soft breaths filled the quiet room. Megan sat on the edge of the bed, her hands covering her face as tears began to fall. The weight of the past year seemed to pour out of her all at once. She glanced at the note that Keanu had left with the key. The words were simple, yet they struck a chord deep within her. "You are not alone. We're in this together." Her tears flowed freely, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of feeling seen, cared for, and safe. Outside, Keanu sat in his car, gazing up at the faint stars that peeked through the city's light-polluted sky. His mind raced, reflecting on the twists and turns that had brought him here. Megan's story, her resilience, and her unwavering love for her son had deeply moved him. But he knew this was only the beginning. A night in a motel was just a temporary fix. They needed a long-term plan. Pulling out his phone again, he began to make a new round of calls. He reached out to connections at local shelters and community centers, searching for resources that could offer Megan a stable foundation. He tapped into his network, leveraging his influence to ensure she wouldn't have to navigate this alone. "We're going to make this work," he murmured to himself, determination etched into his features. "No one deserves to live like this." Back in the motel room, Megan lay beside Elliot, watching his peaceful face as he slept. The quiet hum of the air conditioner filled the room, a stark contrast to the relentless noise and discomfort of their car. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where Elliot could play in a safe home, where she could work without fear, and where survival wasn't a daily struggle. As she closed her eyes, Keanu's words played over in her mind. "We're in this together." For the first time in a long time, Megan allowed herself to believe it might be true. Megan's life had been a whirlwind of hardships, injustices, and relentless struggles. Keanu stood outside the modest motel that evening, his thoughts consumed with finding a meaningful way to help her and Elliot rebuild their lives. Offering one comfortable night wasn't enough, it would only be a brief reprieve. What she needed was a lasting opportunity, a chance to reclaim her dignity and stability. Pulling out his phone, Keanu began making a series of calls. He reached out to old friends and community connections, explaining Megan's situation with urgency and clarity. "No one deserves to go through this alone," he murmured to himself, typing out a detailed message to a trusted contact. This wasn't just about offering help, it was about creating a foundation for a new beginning. Inside the motel room, Megan tucked Elliot into bed. The little boy stirred briefly before settling into a peaceful sleep, his tiny frame finally able to relax after weeks of discomfort. Megan sat on the edge of the bed, her body heavy with exhaustion, but her heart flickered with a fragile hope. As her head hit the pillow, she whispered softly, "Maybe this is the start of something better." Early the next morning, Keanu woke with a sense of purpose. He had spent the night strategizing and making arrangements, determined to put his plan into action. His first destination was a local community center he had supported in the past. The center was known for its outreach programs and its ability to provide transitional support for families in need. Speaking with the center's director, Keanu laid out Megan's story. She needs temporary housing, access to social services, and a job, anything to break this cycle, he explained, his tone resolute. The director nodded thoughtfully. "We can provide housing for a few weeks and connect her with social workers. We'll also refer her to job opportunities through our network." Keanu smiled, relieved. "Thank you. I'll cover any immediate costs to make this happen." Before leaving, he made a generous donation to the center, ensuring it could continue its mission to help others like Megan. Later that afternoon, Keanu returned to the motel. Megan was sitting on the bed, holding Elliot in her arms. She looked up at the soft knock on the door, her heart skipping a beat. When she opened it, she found Keanu standing there with a warm smile and a few shopping bags in hand. "I brought something for you," he said, handing her the bags. Inside were new clothes for both her and Elliot, along with a hygiene kit. Megan's eyes widened, and she held the items as though they were fragile. I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "You've already done so much." Keanu shook his head. "You don't need to thank me, but if you are ready, I'd like to talk about the next step." Megan hesitated, then nodded and invited him in. While Elliot played with one of the small toys Keanu had left earlier, Megan sat across from him, listening intently as he shared his plan. "I've arranged for temporary housing for you and Elliot at a community center," he explained. "It's safe and has resources to help you get back on your feet. I've also spoken to contacts about job opportunities. The rest depends on what you are comfortable with." Megan blinked in disbelief. It was hard to process that someone was investing so much in her and Elliot. "Why are you doing this for us?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Keanu paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because I believe everyone deserves a chance to start over, and because I can. If I have the resources to help, it would be wrong not to." That evening, Keanu accompanied Megan and Elliot to the community center. The director greeted them warmly and showed Megan to a small but welcoming room. It had a clean bed for her and a crib for Elliot. There was even a tiny play area with a few toys for children. As Megan took it all in, tears welled up in her eyes. She placed a hand on the crib, her voice cracking as she said, "I don't even know what to say. I can't believe this." Keanu, standing by the door, offered a reassuring smile. "You don't have to say anything. Just focus on taking care of yourself and Elliot. This is the start of a new chapter." Megan turned to him, her gratitude shining through her tears. "Thank you, Keanu. I'll never forget this." Keanu nodded, his expression soft. "You don't have to. Just promise me you'll keep moving forward." For Megan, the small room and the kindness of a stranger felt like the first ray of light in a long dark tunnel. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope for a brighter future. Megan struggled to find the right words, her voice thick with emotion as she cradled Elliot in her arms. "I don't even know how to express what this means to me," she whispered, her eyes glistening with tears. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you." Keanu smiled gently, his calm demeanor reassuring her. "Don't worry about that right now," he said. "Focus on yourself and Elliot. Remember, this isn't charity, it's the start of a new chapter." That night, as Megan tucked Elliot into his crib for the first time, a sense of hope began to fill the void that had consumed her for so long. She sat on the edge of her new bed, watching her son sleep soundly, and allowed herself to exhale the fear she'd been holding onto for months. Outside, Keanu stood with the community center director, speaking quietly under the glow of the streetlights. "I want to make sure she has all the support she needs," Keanu said firmly. "If she needs more time or other opportunities, please let me know." The director nodded, a warm smile on her face. "You've given her something no one else has until now, a chance." As Keanu walked away, he glanced back at the lit windows of the center. "Now she has a starting point," he murmured to himself. "But there's still so much more to do." Weeks passed, and Megan began to settle into a routine that was no longer defined by survival but by progress. With the help of the community center and Keanu's connections, she secured a part-time job as a receptionist at a small, welcoming office. It wasn't just a job, it was her first step toward rebuilding her confidence. On Megan's first day, Keanu accompanied her to the office. Standing outside the door, he offered her an encouraging smile. "This is just the beginning," he said. "You are going to do great." Though her hands trembled with nervousness, Megan entered the office to find warm colleagues and a manager who greeted her with understanding and patience. Day by day, her confidence grew as she received small compliments on her work ethic and kindness. Each evening, she returned to her modest apartment exhausted, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was in control of her life. One evening, over a quiet cup of tea, Megan confided in Keanu about a decision she had made, allowing her late husband's parents to visit Elliot, but on her terms. "It wasn't easy," she admitted, "but I know it's the right thing for Elliot and for me." Keanu nodded, pride evident in his expression. "You made a difficult but brave choice," he said. "Giving them a chance shows how much you've grown. You are in control now." As Megan watched Elliot playing on the carpet in their small but cozy apartment, a deep sense of gratitude filled her. She was building a future not only for herself, but also for her Sona future, filled with possibilities and hope. One day, while sitting in a local cafe with Keanu, she looked at him with a smile that carried equal parts gratitude and determination. "I want you to know," she said, "that one day I am going to pay back everything you've done for me." Keanu shook his head, smiling. "Megan, you are already paying it back." he said. "Every step you take to improve your life and Elliot's is more than enough. I never did this expecting anything in return." Her smile widened, though her eyes remained serious. "Even so," she said, "I want to help others one day, just like you helped me." Keanu leaned back in his chair, nodding. "That's the best way to pay it forward," he said, "turning your story into inspiration for others." That evening, as Keanu said his goodbyes and drove home, he glanced up at the starry sky. He felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for being able to help Megan and Elliot, but for how much their journey had changed him. They had reminded him of the power of compassion and the strength found in even the darkest moments. In her apartment, Megan tucked Elliot into bed, watching as he drifted off to sleep with a peaceful smile on his face. For the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face whatever challenges the future held. Her story was far from over, but for the first time, the next chapter seemed full of promise. Both Megan and Keanu moved forward in their lives, carrying the certainty that even in the darkest times, there is always light often from the most unexpected places. In today's United States, where economic struggles and housing insecurity affect countless families, Megan and Elliot's story reflects the resilience and vulnerability of those facing systemic hardships. The moments Keanu Reeves shared with Megan, offering resources without judgment, prioritizing her dignity, and creating sustainable opportunities, remind us of the power of compassion combined with action. Megan's initial reluctance to accept help illustrates the pride and self-reliance ingrained in American culture, but it also highlights the importance of community support in breaking cycles of hardship. The lesson here is clear. Small, intentional acts of kindness can serve as catalysts for profound change. Whether it's donating to local shelters, mentoring someone in need, or simply offering a listening ear, these efforts ripple outward. Keanu's ability to empower Megan rather than pity her teaches us that true help means restoring autonomy and hope. Let this story inspire us to see those struggling as neighbors, not statistics, and to take meaningful steps to make a difference. If Megan and Elliot's story of resilience and hope moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that remind us of the power of kindness and community. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video with another tale that will warm your heart and inspire your soul.